This is Kendall Hyatt with Grizzly Controls, and today I'm going to demonstrate how to use our MotoGUI software that comes with the Gaimoto temperature controller. If you go to our website, www.grizzlycontrols.com, and here under the products link, click software, it'll take you to the MotoGUI page. Down here under downloads, we can download the MotoGUI application for Windows. It works on XP 7, 8, and 10. I have a Windows 7 machine right now on a 64-bit architecture. And while that's downloading, I'm just going to go ahead and point out that also on this page you can download the MotoGUI user manual, as well as any of these easy config files, which are configuration files that MotoGUI can open and program your Gaimoto controller for any of these applications. So I'm going to keep this download, and the installer will run here in just a second. And I'm going to click next, and next again to accept the default install location, next again to accept the default start menu folder name, choose to create a desktop icon, click next, and then click install. I'm going to choose not to launch it immediately. I'm also going to get this greenhouse fans, watering, humidity, and freeze protection control config file and drag these right over here to my desktop where my screen capture is active. To run MotoGUI, I'm just going to double click this desktop icon. The main window will pop up. And just to go through the tabs on this main window real quick, the first tab is the Connections tab, in which I can establish a connection to a Gaimoto controller. The Config tab contains 3 buttons. The first is the Upload button, where I can upload a configuration off of the controller, but this button's only enabled if a controller is currently connected. I can also create or open a Gaimoto configuration file. On the Status tab, I have the option to upload the status information off of Gaimoto. Again, this is only enabled if a controller is connected. Same thing here with the Logs tab. I can upload logs from a connected controller. These logs are uploaded as a comma-separated value file, which can be opened in Microsoft Excel or a similar program that can plot and graph that data for a graphical representation of your log history. I can also erase the logs and reset the logging period, the logging record back to 1 on the controller. The Help tab, the first thing it has is a link to the FTDI USB drivers, and you may need to download and install these to get Gaimoto and MotoGUI talking to one another. This next little text block right here just lets you know that for any widget in MotoGUI, any button or input field, you can hover your mouse over that widget and a help text bubble will pop up letting you know what the function of that widget is and how it applies. If you need to get in touch with us, there's a Contact Us link. For the user's manual, click here. The About tab is just some general information about Grizzly Controls and our copyright information. So back to the Connections tab, I have a Gaimoto controller hooked up on my COM6 USB serial port, so I'm going to select COM6 from this drop down, click Connect, and down here in the activity log, I get some verification here that I'm connected to a Gaimoto 4 controller. It's running the software version 2.7.4. Logging is enabled on the controller and the period is set to 60 seconds. Now that I'm connected to Gaimoto, the first thing I'm going to do is go over here to this Config tab and upload the configuration off of the controller. So right now my controller is running a solar hot water heating application. And so in this config window, the 4 tabs I have here are the Inputs tab, where I can configure the sensor inputs and the onboard inputs. I have a Rules tab where I can configure the control rules that we assign to the outputs, which are configured in this Output tab. And I also have a System tab where I configure Gaimoto system parameters. So I'm going to go into a little more detail on each of these tabs. Again, the first tab is the Inputs tab. On the Inputs tab, we configure the external sensor inputs as well as the onboard inputs on Gaimoto. And so again, for this solar hot water heating application, I just have 2 sensor inputs configured right now. The first is my solar collector, the second is my hot water tank. The others are currently disabled. And so this first field here on the sensor inputs, this alias field is an opportunity to name that input in order to identify what it's currently hooked up to. And both my solar collector and my hot water tank inputs are configured to be PTC 1K temperature sensors. Although we do support several thermistors, both PTC and NTC, to make it easier for retrofitting older temperature controllers, and you can configure that here in the sensor type dropdown. Each input can also be assigned an averaging value, as well as they can also be individually calibrated. And down here we can configure the onboard inputs on Gaimoto, and that includes the onboard temperature, voltage, relative humidity, and dew point sensors, and they can also be configured with an averaging value or calibrated. The next tab in the configuration window is the rule tab, in which I configure the control rules for my application. And so for a solar hot water heating application like this one, typically we use a differential temperature type rule, but there are 12 different modes that each of the 8 rules can function in, and they're listed here in the rule mode drop down. So for this differential temperature rule, my input 1 is going to come from the solar collector that I configured on the input tab, and my input 2 is going to come from the hot water tank, again, that I configured on the input tab. And I also have some other parameters down here that apply to the differential rule that I can configure. And so for each rule, some of these parameters may or may not be enabled depending on whether or not they're relevant to that rule. So if I select a time of day timer rule, for example, I don't need to provide it any inputs or any of this other information, but I do need to give it a time of day 1 on and off time, as well as a time of day 2 on and off time. And so that goes for any of these rules. The next tab here is the output tab, where we will configure the operation of the output relays in our application. In our solar hot water heating example, we just have one of the 4 outputs enabled, and its job is to control a water pump that pumps water from the hot water tank to the solar collectors and back. And so again, outputs can also have an alias similar to the inputs, just to identify what the intention of this output is, or what it's hooked up to. This output is assigned just to rule 1, which we configured back on the rule tab as our differential temperature rule. So output 1, our water pump, will close when the conditions in rule 1 become true. You can also combine multiple rules with logical operators to create complex multi-rule equations to customize the behavior of your outputs. However, in this example, we're just going to stick with our differential temperature rule 1. This water pump is configured to operate in the normal mode of operation, where the output strictly follows the rules that are assigned to it. In normal mode, we configure min on and min off times so that the water pump, for example, will turn on or off for a minimum set period of time before flipping back. Outputs can also be configured to operate in a one-shot mode, where they turn on for a set period of time, specified in the one-shot on seconds field, or in a sequence delay mode, where you can tell one output that's assigned to the same control rule logic as another output to turn on after a set period of time, provided here in the sequence delay seconds field. The last tab in the Gaimoto configuration window is the System tab, where we configure Gaimoto system parameters. For example, the time of day, which timestamps the logging records in Gaimoto, temperature units, Celsius or Fahrenheit, the LCD contrast on the LCD display on the controller. We can configure an audible alarm, like if you want an audible beeping noise to turn on when any rule becomes true or an output becomes active, you can assign it here. Right now we just currently have it disabled. You can configure the logging settings, for example, the period and seconds, and enable or disable logging. We can also configure the manual push button trigger so that you have a way to force all of your outputs either individually or all together to an on state for the period of time specified in the timeout seconds. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up our Gaimoto configuration menu walkthrough. I'm just gonna not bother saving this file right now. What I am gonna do is open a different configuration file off my desktop, and that's this greenhouse control configuration file that I downloaded earlier. So right now my controller is running a solar hot water heating application. This is a greenhouse control application. It has more rules configured, different outputs and inputs. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click this download button at the bottom left hand corner of the window to program Gaimoto with this new greenhouse control configuration. And so I get confirmation over here in the activity log that the download was actually successful. Okay, I'm now going to demonstrate uploading status information off of Gaimoto. So I just go over here to the status tab in the main window, click get status, and a new window pops up with all the status values that it just pulled off of the controller. So over here I see all the input sensor statuses. I get low and high records as well as the current values for each of those inputs. I also have the output relay states as well as an on time and off time in hours for those outputs. And this reset control temp field will show NA unless you have a reset control rule enabled and assigned to an output, in which case it will show the reset control temperature. So in this window I have two options down here in the bottom right. I can either refresh the values, which refreshes this window with new status information from the controller. I can also reset the values, which is going to reset the low and high records back to the current input value. So I'm going to click reset here and then refresh, and you can see that the values over here have been reset. The next thing I'm going to demonstrate is the logging operations I have available from MotoGUI. The first thing I'm going to do is upload the logs off of Gaimoto. I have this progress bar down here at the bottom of the main window that'll show me when the operation is completed. And please note that Gaimoto can log up to 30,000 records, so it may take some time to upload all of the data off of the controller. So these logs are uploaded, and you can save them as a comma separated value file. I'm going to go ahead and save them to my desktop here and just open them up with Notepad++ just to show you what the contents of this file looks like. Of course, it's much nicer to look at, and the formatting is a lot better if you open it in Microsoft Excel, but just for the purpose of demonstrating the contents of this file. So here I have a record number, date, time, all of my inputs. That includes my sensor inputs as well as my onboard inputs and all of my outputs. And then each of these individual lines is a one logging record beginning with the record number. Okay, the last thing I can do here is choose to erase the logs off of the controller. This clears the flash where the logs are stored on Gaimoto and resets the log records back to 1. So I'm going to click this, and this takes a fixed amount of time. It's just overwriting all the flash pages where the logs are stored on the controller. Again, I get confirmation that the logs were erased, and just to demonstrate trying to upload logs when there's none available, you'll get this message saying that no log history is available at this time. Gaimoto does send up logs in blocks of 8, so if there haven't been a minimum of 8 logs recorded yet, you're going to get this message until enough time has passed that 8 logs have been recorded on the controller. That pretty much wraps it up for this MotoGUI demonstration. If you have any questions, concerns, need help, troubleshooting, whatever, please feel free to contact us. You can use this link here at the bottom of the Help tab, or just go to our website, www.grizzlycontrols.com, click the Contacts link and send us an email. We'd be happy to hear from you. Thank you so much.